All right. So, thank you everybody for coming. I will kick us off with today's event. You can see that we have a star-studded stellar panel lined up here, and I will introduce you to them in a moment. So if I can have, today's event is towards equitable, humane and sustainable food systems, and it's around protecting animals is essential to combating climate change and biodiversity, so the twin crisis of climate and biodiversity. So we've got a great panel to look at some expert insights and discussions. My name is Kelly Dent. I am from World Animal Protection. I'm the Global Director for External Engagement, and you can see who World Animal Protection are up there on the screen. We have 12 offices around the world in the global north and in the global south, and we're involved with communities on the ground as well as various UN bodies and institutions. I'm going to just mention who each of the panelists are, then I have a short presentation, and then after that presentation I will be asking some questions to each of the panelists, and then there'll be a short period of time at the end for you to ask questions. My apologies, this event did start late because the previous one was late because there were some technical issues, but the organisers have kindly allowed us to have the full time for our event, so we thank them for that. Without further ado, let me first just give a wave as I introduce you, please. If I can introduce Rosina Mbenya, the country coordinator from Pelham. Tulos Boston Behave, who is the chairperson from Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. Sandra Bonetti, who is a family farmer and board member of the National Confederation of Rural Workers and Family Farmers, CONTAG, from Brazil. Rachel Sherrington, who is an investigative researcher and reporter with DISMOG. And Sylvia Mantilla, who is the Global Policy and Communications Manager with World Federation for Animals. And we have Sandra has a person translating for her, so she is the most important person here. Welcome everybody. So if we can move on to the next slide, which I stupidly didn't make any copies of. But basically, in terms of World Animal Protection's organisational goals, we are looking to transform the food system into an equitable, humane and sustainable food system. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a moment. And also we want to see wildlife being kept in the wild, essentially having that right to a wild life. And of course there's clearly an interconnection here when you talk about food systems and industrial factory farming or industrial animal agriculture and wildlife, because we know that a lot of wildlife habitat gets cleared for feed industrial animal agriculture. And of course that clearance of land takes habitat away from animals, and it also takes away the forest from the people and the communities who rely on that as well. So if we can have the next slide, please. So this is just a quick snapshot of the total number of animals that we see slaughtered in a 24-hour period. And this number is increasing. Now, most of the vast majority of these are from industrial animal agriculture. So you can see the scale of the problem. And, as we know, this system that currently exists is not feeding the world. It's actually failing. It's failing communities, it's failing Indigenous people, it's failing animals, it's failing people. And if we move to the next slide, this slide shows how broken our food system actually is. So we've got the figure there of the billions of animals. I think it's 70% of animals are within this industrial farming system, and you can see there some of the implications. There's impacts on public health. It drives climate change. We see biodiversity loss. We also see pesticide use in terms of growing the crops that are used for animal feed, and of course things like antimicrobial resistance, which from giving to the animals to try and keep them healthy in such inhumane conditions actually can flow through to people as well. So we really see quite a few impacts, and I just want to tackle here this notion that emissions from agriculture and emissions from fossil fuels are different. They are not. They are intertwined. So if you take into account pesticide use, then actually that is fossil fuel, but it is being used in the agricultural system or within our food systems. If you take into account the transport that's required, on both ends of the food chain, so as inputs, but also when the food is going to the shops and the supermarkets. Again, these are emissions from the transport sector. So I think we need to dispense with this notion of, emissions are emissions. Emissions don't have passports. Basically, wherever the emissions come from, they are going to impact on the food system. And we know that without action on our food system, we know that reaching the Paris climate temperature target of 1.5 degrees will be out of reach. About a third of our emissions come from food systems. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So, I've pretty much already said that. So, the need for us to put limits on industrial animal agriculture to achieve sustainable development, to achieve an equitable, humane and sustainable food system within that sustainable development. If we could move to the next slide, please. So, basically, as I've mentioned, our vision is for an equitable, humane and sustainable food system, and we want that to replace industrial animal agriculture. Not all agriculture and not all animals. We do see a role for animals within the food system, just not within the industrial animal agricultural system. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this essentially breaks down in a diagrammatic form what we mean by equitable, humane and sustainable. So equitable is about putting people and communities first. Humane is about the way animals within the industrial animal agriculture sector are treated. They are often crammed into very small cages, subject to very painful and brutal mutilation, and fed with all manner of antibiotics to try and keep them healthy. And sustainable is also around where we want to see the planet protected for future generations of people and animals. And this is where we see that in developed countries, so in the global north, in richer countries, we do want to see a shift away from high meat consumption and much more towards plant-based diets and diversity. And when we talk about equitable, I can't go on without mentioning the need for us to address agribusiness and the role that they play. We need to support businesses who are doing the right things, and we need to call out businesses who are not. Businesses who are perpetuating a system that is cruel for animals, that is destroying biodiversity, that is contributing to emissions, that are putting forward false solutions. So we want better governance arrangements around some of those very businesses. If we can move on to the final slide. So just for the reasons of time, I won't dwell on this slide. I've already spoken about the food governance system just then. We also want to see a move towards agroecological practices for small-scale producers and communities and Indigenous people. And then I've already spoken about staying within planetary and social limitations, and that's that need to move towards more plant-rich diets, particularly within the global north. I think that is the last slide from me. If we can, I will now move on to, I can invite you all to join a bit closer together now because we've finished the slides. And I think I am going to come down with you all now. Leave the... Here we are. So let me start with Rosina. Rosina, one of the levers that's identified in the briefing paper is on promoting agroecological practices. From your perspective, what role do you see agroecology playing in achieving both biodiversity and climate goals? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, agroecology, I want to state that it's life. And even as we talk about animal protection, it's the way to go. And in Africa specifically, we have over 80% of our food that we eat coming from the smallholder farmers and even pastoral communities. And this is, to us, a sustainable way, because it is not about maybe one farmer feeding a whole village, but it's about the many small efforts to feed a whole village, if I can start there. And as Pelham Kenya Network, which is a national movement, actually an umbrella of organizations that are promoting agroecology, and these are the practices and the principles. We see its role and the critical importance in terms of transforming the food systems, because, of course, we have the climate crisis, we have biodiversity loss, and other problems that have been caused by industrialized systems of agriculture. And looking at even issue, we have examples from agricultural farms. So now, diversified kind of livelihoods is helpful. You find that there. Livestock also is very important inputs or bio inputs.
It's on.
It hasn't been working. Was it working before? Yeah, so I'll just continue and say that the issue of agroecology is what we need to see. And particularly having empowered farmers who are really doing it, and particularly am I holding it the right way? Yes. I'm holding it. Okay, so I'm saying, but I'm saying in terms of the agroecology, in terms of practice, that is what we want to see in farm. A lot of harmful pesticides have been applied, and we have even had farmers, we have had communities, even some going to an extent of losing lives because of this, or rather getting to very instances of very sick people and using a lot of even more money to hospitals. And secondly, it's also the harmful inputs like pesticides. They are washing themselves, they are going to the rivers, and they are just also killing more biodiversity. Like bees are being killed, and we have a crisis. If we don't take care of this biodiversity in the next few years, then we shall not have any food. We will have lost the pollination that bees bring. We shall the biodiversity importance that life below and above the ground brings with us. And And therefore, what are we saying is the Stella Kenya network? We are saying that even as we support the animal production, let us support these practices that are agroecological, which respect indigenous practices, which also bring into play biological inputs that are very important, and also bring in aspects like fairness when it comes to animal production, so that we don't have animals which are being produced in a way that is inhuman, that is very restricting that able to also cooperate and learn together. To learn together. Sometimes we assume farmers don't know, but they are the ones who know. Actually, we are the ones who don't know, but farmers are the ones who know most. And giving the space for farmers to co-create, that's a basic principle in agroecology. Even when researchers are doing their own research, are we engaging farmers? Are we doing our research alone? Or are we doing what we call participatory action research? Research that puts the farmer at the center, and you work with the farmer to the same extent. And as you talk about agroecology, in Africa, we have seen it transforming livelihoods. And even last, like a month ago, I was visiting very big like coffee farmers. It's not about small farms, but even 10 acres and even above, even 40 acres, it's working, it is possible, and it is actually the way to go, because it's going to take care of the climate crisis, because it's going to help us think, even if it's how much level, and at the same time, it's also going to enable us to have adaptive, because with the soil, strong soils, with the good animals that have been raised, we don't have to really have these industrialized agriculture systems which have been having a lot of emissions from the fossil fuels. And even as I close, I want to emphasize is the climate has been changing. It has been changing, and therefore food and agriculture must change too. And even at this COP, let us also purpose to increase the financing for agriculture, and more so to sustainable agriculture practices, because at the end of the day, we cannot do without food systems. Sorry, the microphone.
Mic working, and we did hear you, so thank you. I'm going to speak from the lectern because we only have one mic working properly. So I'm sorry, it's not quite a fireside chat, but look at them, not me, basically. So I want to move now to the next question, which is over to you, Toulos. And what we'd like to hear from you is, what policy reforms do you want to see to support small-scale family farmers to strengthen the agroecological practices that benefit animals, biodiversity and the climate? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Am I audible? Well, first of all, thank you to all organizers for inviting me here. It is always good to raise a voice from the farmers, especially from the Asia and especially from the Central Asia. It is also good for me being the only man amongst the beautiful ladies here. Well, the policies, no? Well, to be honest, what I would like to say, there are a lot of policies. There are a lot of good laws, recommendations, regulations, not only in Asia, but all over the world. I would like to maybe ask or to say to follow those rules. All those regulations and policies are being just in the papers, and would like to follow them. Finally, maybe they are not being followed because of the lack of information for the small-scale farmers. And for instance, in Kyrgyzstan, since I'm from Kyrgyzstan, I would like to say like 98% of food security is under the shoulders of small-scale farmers. And only 2% is for the industrial agricultural things. And the government is helping the industrial agriculture, which is nonsense. And what I'm saying that 98% is not only the agricultural food, but also the animal products. And what else? The policies which I would like to mention that, yeah, as I said, education and trainings, the market access to and support, the biodiversity conservation, and the most important, I think, that is the access to resources and financing for the small-scale farmers. Yeah, that's all what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God, it's very disconcerting hearing yourself speak. Thank you very much, Tulos. Sandra, COP33 in Belém, in Brazil, is fast approaching. What do family farmers want to see from COP30?
Bom dia. Eu não speak English e por isso estou com a tradução aqui. Porém, nós da agricultura, é importante reforçar a importância de estar nesse painel. Nós que representamos a agricultura familiar brasileira, que são mais de 10 milhões de pessoas que estão no campo do Brasil.
It's important for us to be here in this panel because we represent more than 10 million small-scale family farmers in Brazil.
E o que a gente espera para a COP30 esperamos que o Brasil de fato reconheça. E aí, quando a gente fala o Brasil e o mundo, reconheça a agricultura familiar que não... as diferentes agriculturas que se tem no Brasil. A gente não tem um tipo só de agricultura e para isso precisamos reconhecer o quanto que a agropecuária, a agricultura brasileira, a agricultura familiar brasileira é importante.
What I want to see towards COP30 is that the Brazil and the world recognize that we have many different types of agriculture and livestock production, and the small scale and the family farming is very important.
E o que a gente espera até a construção da Conferência de Clima no Brasil é que uma série de políticas públicas que são estruturantes comecem a ser, de fato, pensadas e implementadas. Pois a gente já tem uma série de políticas institucionais que reforçam o quanto que é importante a agricultura familiar e a agricultura biodiversa, a pecuária familiar, o quanto que as compras institucionais, que é a alimentação escolar, é importante nesse processo para que a gente introduza na vida das pessoas os sistemas alimentares que sejam mais biodiversos possíveis.
And what I want to see for COP30 is that we already have a lot of structural public policies that need to be on the ground, need to reach the ground. And to support the biodiversity-based agriculture and livestock production. In Brazil, the government has public policies to buy food from this small-scale agriculture, and this is important and needs to be enhanced because we need to introduce this diverse biodiversity-based production in the lives of people.
E para encerrar, dizer o quanto que os sistemas da agricultura familiar são mais biodiversos, tem estocagem de carbono, o quanto que pode fazer parte da solução climática. No nosso país, no Brasil, nós somos a mais de 70% dos estabelecimentos, mas estamos apenas com 23% do território nacional. Mas a gente é responsável por quase 70%, já chegamos a 70% dos alimentos que vai à mesa de cada brasileiro e brasileira. Então, por isso, é importante reforçar quanto a agricultura familiar tem para contribuir com os circuitos curtos, mas também o quanto que a gente pode ajudar nesse processo de mitigação das mudanças climáticas. Obrigada.
I want to reinforce that in Brazil we have 70% of the farmers in Brazil are small-scale farmers, but we occupy only 20% of the actual farmlands. And in this place we produce 70% of the staple food that Brazilians eat every day. So we are part of the solution. It's important for us to acknowledge our contribution to small circuits of food transportation and food production as a solution to mitigate climate change.
Obrigado, Sandra. Let me please go to Rachel next. So Rachel, one of the levers identified in World Animal Protection's briefing paper, which is based on a broader paper around a just, humane and sustainable food system, is strengthening food systems governance. And I know that DeSmog has looked at corporate influences in policy spaces for quite some time already. So my question to you is, how does the agricultural lobby at climate conferences hinder the urgent action needed for transforming our food systems? And if you could also talk about what reforms that you believe are necessary to make food systems governance more transparent and accountable to public and environmental interests rather than to the agenda of industry. Thank you.
Yes, so I've been reporting on the influence of big agriculture at the climate summits. This is the third year now. And I'd say the lobby here is powerful and getting more powerful, as well as being under-scrutinized. So last year was the biggest COP ever. Food was top of the agenda and the industry came out in force. So I covered how the industrial meat industry set a plan for COP. They coordinated across countries. They had a plan to tell our story and to tell it well, to promote our science, to promote all their favoured solutions. The methane metric GWP star, which will allow them to essentially magic away their methane emissions. It's a tactic that scientists have said is highly misleading. Also planning to target the FAO at the FAO Pavilion, ministers of important countries. There was really this huge coordinated effort for Dubai, and that's in internal documents that I happen to see. But I have no doubt that there's a similarly highly coordinated effort for this COP as well, and there certainly will be for Brazil in COP30, which the industry have in their sights. And COPs provide loads of routes to influence for industry. So industry delegates will come in their hundreds to COPs. Last year it was 350. I think this year, I'm crunching the numbers at the moment, but probably over 200 again. And a company, so for example, pesticides company Bayer sent about a dozen lobbyists, full-time, highly trained senior PR executives to COP this year. And if we think about, I guess, the types of imbalances this breeds, it's just not possible for smallholder or agroecological farmers or indigenous groups to have this kind of manpower on the ground, as well as these huge lobbying efforts that happened before. And if we even think that COPs are then just a small part of the industry influence overall, so there's also lobbying that goes on all year in major regions of note like the EU and US and Brazil, which also leads to the fact that sometimes, yes, industry lobbyists come in government delegations like with Brazil and Argentina and the US, but sometimes they almost don't need to because these governments are already so on board with what industry is saying and the type of solutions they're promoting. That sometimes the governments are also the most obstructive force in negotiations. So I really can't overstate the power actually that the industry has in these fora. And I think it goes under the radar in the way that the fossil fuel industry's influence does not go under the radar anymore. People are very aware that fossil fuel lobbyists are here. They're aware of the contentiousness of the lot of solutions they promote here, like CCS and hydrogen. And I think there needs to be a growing awareness that there's lobbyists here, of the tactics that they use, and of the power imbalances, the huge power imbalances that exist when it comes to thinking about who gets to participate in these events and who has the most powerful voice and the ability to actually speak to the people making decisions here.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Let me come on to Sylvia. So Sylvia, I know that you were at COP16, so that's the Convention on Biodiversity in Calais, just a couple of weeks ago. I'm surprised you're still standing.
Me too.
What did you witness there, and how can we ensure a greater coherence between the climate and the biodiversity conventions? And also, if you could discuss the toolkit developed by your network, which we are also a member of, that supports policymakers in placing animals at the centre of climate plans and also within the new NDCs, the Nationally Determined Contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Can you hear me well? First, I just want to say that I'm really honored to have followed this act, which is really insightful, and to have the opportunity to, I'm just going to remove this, to talk about animals in the context of climate action. So, yes, Rachel was also at the CBD COP16, and one of the good news is that the topic of integrating climate and biodiversity action is getting traction, and that's good news for humans, for animals, and for the planet. There was a decision that was adopted by the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, at COP16, which is on biodiversity and climate. And it emphasizes the urgency of integrating actions to achieve global environmental goals, such as the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreement. And it is specifically asked parties, countries, for two things: to identify synergies to bring biodiversity and climate action together, and to submit their views on a potential joint work program between the Rio Conventions in 2025. I also want to highlight that this decision asked the CBD to explore or to host a technical information exchange in 2025 between the Rio Conventions. I'm highlighting this because this creates an opportunity, and I just want to go to the second part of your question, is how can we create greater policy coherence? Animals are essential for ecosystems to function, including to deliver services such as carbon sequestration. So animals are our allies to protect biodiversity, but also to mitigate climate change. And I had some slides, but I think we're probably running short on time. But I would invite you before the end of the day, to those that are here, to pass by booth 5, where we talk about all the amazing things that animals do for ecosystems to function, such as sea otters, helping us offset the equivalent to the carbon emissions by 3 to 6 million cars annually, or elephants, increasing carbon sequestration in forests by 7%. These are just a few examples of the amazing things that actually wild animals can do for climate change mitigation. So going back to the question on the greater policy coherence, I think we can bring in the issues on how protecting wild animals is critical for both agendas, and that includes food systems. And I know that took me a while to get back to the theme bringing us all together, but I love how you said, Rosina, there's climate change. Food systems also need to change. And without transforming food systems into more sustainable ones, we just simply cannot protect wildlife. We cannot leverage the contribution of wildlife to climate change mitigation. So we have indeed put together a toolkit for policymakers to leverage wildlife contributions to climate change mitigation. And I'll invite you all to come to the official launch, which is next week on the 19th of November on Food Day. But this toolkit, essentially what it does is that it outlines policy actions and recommended measures to directly protect wildlife in their habitats, but also change up the production of food systems, but also think about enabling food environments so that consumers can make more informed decisions and help them promote shifts to sustainable and healthy diets. Because by doing so, we can free up billions of hectares for more nature-positive land use. I'm going to stop there so that we get more chance for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia, and I'm sorry those slides weren't there. We do have a chance to, we might be able to link them in the summary. So I wanted to say thank you very much. I have one final question for each. So it's the same question to each of the panellists, and if you can try and answer in a sentence. We can start with you, Sylvia, and then you can maybe pass the mic to Sandra and then come back the other way. So if the question to each of you is, if you could ask governments here at COP29, we're not at 30 yet, 29, one thing, and they would listen to you around food systems, what would it be?
Sorry, I'm just going to remove this. It's, like you said, very weird to talk and hear yourself. Well, that's a big ask, but if I were to go back to what I thought was a great paper by World Animal Protection, I really like the metaphor of the levers. And so one thing I would ask is, by considering animal welfare, so improving, promoting systems that center animal welfare, and also promoting plant-rich diets and healthier diets, we can actually get towards sustainable food systems and sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Eu diria que a gente precisa ter um reconhecimento que temos várias agriculturas e que a agricultura de base familiar ela precisa de mais apoios e que tanto as cadeias, tanto a produção de vegetais, biodiversos, seja a extração ou os próprios animais, que toda propriedade de agricultura familiar tem produção de animais, mas é uma produção de animais que ela é muito mais coerente, ela é integrada com a propriedade. Então, o reconhecimento desses sistemas, o quanto que eles são mais resilientes.
I would ask them to recognize that we are different agricultural systems. The small-scale familiar farm production needs more support, and that we are biodiversity-based, and even our livestock production, we are biodiversity-based, and our livestock production is more climate resilient.
I would ask them what they're doing to ensure that powerful vested interests who have an interest in the status quo and whose business and profit motive goes directly against what climate science tells us we need to do. So in the case of agriculture, reducing industrial livestock, what are they doing to ensure those interests are not unduly influencing the debate and outcomes here, and also to ensure that they're not dominating over other voices and farmers and groups who have the solutions and are also most affected by the decisions made here.
Thank you. For me, I would ask them, why can't we phase out industrialized agriculture systems which have been proved to be very harmful to health, to the climate, to biodiversity, and make a radical shift to phasing in sustainable agroecological food systems which are safe to human, safe for the planet, and safe for the biodiversity. And at the same time, I would ask, why can't we increase the climate financing for food systems which are sustainable? I like the caps of the two farmers, and particularly more climate financing directed to smallholder farmers. Listening from my panelists here, it's like smallholder farmers, they are making a large contribution, but how are they benefiting in climate discussions?
Thank you. I would ask all these government people and the decision-making people to maybe put full focus on small-scale farmers. And let me say one more time, the small-scale farmers in Asia are completely different than small-scale farmers in Europe or in USA and all of those big countries. And to build their strategy, the agricultural strategy on with maybe on focus on the small-scale farmers and needs of small-scale farmers of Asia.
So, thank you, everyone. Imagine, if governments actually did listen to all of you, and what a different world we'd have for people and for animals and for the climate. We have a short period of time for people to ask questions, so I'd invite the panellists to stay here. Now, we only have one working mic, so I'm going to ask one of my World Animal Protection colleagues if they can take the working mic to the person who raises their hand, and then we'll bring it back to the panellists that we're going to that I'll ask to respond. So, can I just see if anybody in the audience has any questions for any of our panellists, please? No one. No questions. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. So I wanted to direct the question to our journalists, and feel free that others can answer. So yeah, thank you for describing the reality. So this is what we have. But I also wanted to know what the positive side. Like, we are mobilizing small-scale farmers, indigenous peoples. We are mobilizing and trying to really look at countries who can be our allies. So I wanted to hear your perception. Of course, you have listened, to the position of the country. So I don't know if you can mention which ally should we go to, so that our voice can be further amplified. Ourselves, we are mobilizing indigenous peoples mechanism, farmers, the unions, NGOs, we are mobilizing. But of course, we need allies from the governments.
Yes, I think that's a really a good question, and thank you for asking it. I suppose my work has really been identifying the blockers to action. And yeah, we're releasing a story and research on Tuesday about the lobbyists that have come this year. And I guess that will it shows that actually more and more lobbyists are coming in country delegations, which gives them the highest level of access to talks. And so that will show the countries that are really obstructing action. Which we hope will be kind of useful in understanding some of the negotiating dynamics. In terms of the more positive side, I'm potentially not the best person to ask, but I think understanding that different countries act as lobbyists for or against industry lines and actually have really different interests and different lines that they take in the negotiations is really important in understanding how kind of food politics plays out in the COPs, and is a good question. But yeah, I might not be the best person to answer on those that are advocating for solutions.
Did anybody else on the panel want to comment on those advocating for solutions here at COP? Or add anything? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I'm not sure if my answer is helpful, but one thing that we saw at COP16 is that despite a powerful lobbying effort, the Cali Fund was established. And this is, of course, a voluntary fund, but it showed the force, the power of collective groups working together against powerful lobbies and overcoming those obstacles. So I'm not sure I can add on where to look, but it did give me hope in terms of, as long as we are operating as a collective and we've identified what brings us together and map, with also thanks to the media, these ecosystems, it gives me hope that we can actually manage to be a force to be reckoned with.
Great. So I want to say thank you very much to everyone here for coming. I also want to thank the panelists very warmly. I mean, what a diverse panel, right? And what a range of really rich information and experiences. So I want to thank the panel. And if I can ask panel to stay, please, for some photos. And the rest of you can either hang around and ask questions and chat, or head off to wherever you're going to next. And hope that you all enjoy your semi-day of rest tomorrow, and see some of you next week at COP. I hope you start the week filled with energy, because, of course, we won't have it by the end of the week. So thank you, everybody.